Today, we're continuing in our series on There's Just Something About Jesus. There is something about Jesus that is so important. And we spent the first 4 weeks of the series talking about who Jesus is. Oh, did I forgot to say the kids can go now? For the first 4 weeks, we talked a little bit about Jesus and who Jesus is, and we talked about how he was the Son of God and the Messiah, how he was the Word, how that he was also the great teacher or rabbi in that moment. These next 4 weeks, starting last week, we're talking about how Jesus did ministry. What did Jesus' ministry look like? And at the beginning, at the first week, we talked a little bit about how that Jesus intentionally made time for 12 men. In other words, he discipled 12 men over the period of 3 years. He passed on, I won't say everything he knew, because I don't think there's any way any of us will ever know everything that he knew. But they passed on the things that he knew about ministry and about people and about what the church and what the kingdom needed to look like to these 12 men who over the course of the next few decades passed it on to other generations of believers. So that we know what God expects from us as a church, so that we're communicating with one another who God is and who Jesus is and what Jesus has done for us. But beyond those personal encounters with those 12 men and the way that we know that Jesus at times spoke to the crowds, Jesus also had personal interaction with a lot of different people over the course of the gospel readings. Now, we've been reading through the Gospels, and at least we challenged everybody to read through the 4 Gospels between Christmas and Easter. And if you're on track and reading with us today, what I think would have been Mark chapter 7, am I right? One of you is nodding. That's a good sign, okay. For the rest of you, catch up with us. So Mark chapter 7, and it's walking through what Jesus is doing in ministry, in life, what he's sharing, what he's teaching. But what strikes me is how many personal encounters that the Gospels tell us about how Jesus interacted with just 1 or 2 people at a time. In other words, there were moments when he and his disciples definitely took time to feed, to heal, to interact, to serve people in very personal ways. And sometimes it began with big crowds, then ended up with just a few people. And sometimes it started with just a few people and ended up being a really big crowd. But what we do see is there's a balance to Jesus' ministry. He just didn't do one thing. He did many things throughout the course of his ministry that really showed to us, I think, the balance of life that Jesus wants us to have for our lives as well. But he met people where they were and with the needs that they had, and he did what he could to meet those needs. Now, folks, we live in a world that have lots of needs. Let's just acknowledge that out loud. It's not just spiritual needs. There's physical needs. There's emotional needs. There's a lot of different things that our world is experiencing where they are in need of help and someone to come alongside of them. There was a moment when a woman approached Jesus with a special gift for him. She broke in a very expensive jar of perfume over the feet of Jesus, and then, depending on which gospel account you read in, she wiped his feet with her hair. Now, that jar of perfume could have been sold and getting the money given to the poor. And let me just read these verses for a minute, because I think there's something that Jesus shares with us about the ministry to those who are in need from this passage. Actually, if you're in the reading plan, I know I keep talking about this. It's a subtle hint to catch up with us. It'll be your reading for next Sunday. So Mark chapter 14, verse 4, it starts with this. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why did she waste this perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. And I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." And these words that Jesus said right there, this is one of, I think, 20 different stories that are in all 4 of the Gospels. This woman's sacrifice for the sake of Jesus. But what I think it reveals to us beyond this woman's outrageous act and gift toward Jesus was that there was an ongoing ministry in Jesus' circle to the poor. In other words, they were constantly ministering to the needs of the poor, and they were constantly, in some ways, I'll say it as easy as I can, collecting money to be able to give and to help those that they were poor that they were running across. And some in that group looked at that gift and said, the ministry would have been better off if we'd have sold that perfume, put the money in the coffers, and then distributed it and bought bread with it or gave it to people as they had financial need. Matter of fact, in John's account of this story, he tells us who was the main complainer, and it was Judas. Judas was the one that was complaining the money didn't come in, and Judas was the one who kept the money accounts for the disciples. But Jesus makes this statement in here. He says, the poor you will always have with you. And many people read that kind of dismissively, like Jesus was just admitting out loud that, hey, the needs of the poor are always going to be there, like it's some kind of nagging child that's always saying, mommy, 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 mommy. But I don't think that's what Jesus was saying. Jesus isn't downplaying the fact that the poor will always be around us. Instead, he's making just a statement, a fact about life. The poor will always be with us. Those in need will always be around us. And I think he was making a statement of fact about the way he did ministry. And the poor will always be part of this ministry. Those in need are always around, and the church will always have a ministry to them. Did you catch that? This is one of Jesus' ways of ministry. This is the way Jesus did ministry. He just didn't speak words of truth to people. He got involved in their lives and helped where they were in need. Now, folks, there are things around us all the time where people are in need, and our world is no different today than it was then. Well, it is, but it's not. People still are in need. There are always those who do not have enough to eat. There are always those who can't afford housing and are living in the streets. There are always those who don't have enough money to buy their kids adequate clothing to walk through life. There are always those retired seniors whose income is really not enough to quite cover their expenses. There are always kids who go to school without a lunch. There are always those who have lost their jobs and something in their life is about to be repossessed. There are those who have broken down on the side of the road and they don't have the money to fix their cars or to even get out from the side of the road. There are those who can't pay their property taxes and their homes end up in foreclosure. There are those whose cars can't get fixed, and because they can't get fixed, they can't make it to their job, and so the problem just compounds. They go from not being able to have a car to not being able to have a job to being unable to completely prepare themselves for any part of life. There are always those whose jobs do not pay as much as their bills. How do they say that sometimes? The month is longer than my income. There will always be needs around us. Physical needs of people around us. And Jesus knew this would never change. That no matter where you are in the world, honestly, we are the richest country that's ever existed on the planet, and guess what? The poor are still with us. Jesus does not judge why they are in need. He just leverages his resources to see how he can help. Now I want you to take a look back at verses 7 and 8 for just a minute here, because I want to make 2 quick points here. As a matter of fact, if you're in the habit of underlining things in your Bible, I know some people don't think that you should ever do that, but I do that all through my Bible. I would challenge you to underline 2 sentences or partial sentences here. In verse 7, Jesus says, "The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want." and read a little bit longer. But you will not always have me, he says. And then verse 8, she did what she could. Those two statements to me, I think, define how we ought to respond to the needs in our world. Jesus was saying, the poor you always have with you. Let me make a couple statements here real quickly to help you understand your responsibility in this world. He says, first, you can help them anytime you want. In other words, the ability to help people doesn't depend on them, it depends on us. It depends on me. I can do something about it when I finally choose to do something about it. Which means, oh gosh, this is going to be a little harsh. It means that the needs in the world exist because we haven't done our part yet, in some ways. You can help them anytime you want. And Jesus is very clearly saying the impetus falls on us. Those needs will be met when we finally decide it's time. And then secondly, and this is the one that really strikes at me, she did what she could. In other words, she took what she already had at her disposal and she used it to do something for the good of someone else. She did what she could. And I wonder, if we use just those two statements to try to help us to understand how we ought to minister inside of our community to the needs of our community, I wonder how that would change how we reacted to our community. Are we willing to help them now? And are we doing what we can? See, Jesus' ministry was filled with meeting the needs of people. And I know we've read only like a gospel and a half so far, or not quite. But it's amazing to me how many things we've already seen where Jesus has taken the physical needs of people as a paramount. It's something that was important. And he challenged, and not only did he challenge people to do something, he did it himself at times. Listen to some of the things that Jesus did. He fed 5,000 hungry people who stayed a couple days too long to come listen to him teach. In other words, they came to hear him teach, and they just stayed, and after a couple of days, they ran out of food. And Jesus looked around and said, what are we going to do? And then he fed them. In Luke chapter 4, Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. She had, we don't even know, a fever, a common cold. And then after that, literally, they opened the house and people started bringing person after person after person for Jesus to heal. He started his own little health clinic right there in Peter's house that day. In John chapter 5, it was an invalid at the side of the pool of Bethesda. In Mark chapter 3, we all read this last week, he restored a withered hand to full use in the middle of the temple on a Sabbath day. There was a woman with chronic bleeding that reached out for Jesus and for his help, and Jesus recognized her and healed her. There was a man that was born blind in the city of Jericho that yelled out to him as he walked by the one day. In other words, he just knew Jesus was walking by. He couldn't see him. He was blind, and he just kept yelling out loud until Jesus noticed and came over and did something for him. In Luke chapter 17, Jesus fed 4,000 people. There was a centurion's servant who he healed from paralysis after a bad fall. There was the 10 lepers outside of the country of Samaria that literally on the border that they came to him because they couldn't live in Jewish territory because they were lepers, and so they lived on the edge. Literally, they weren't in Samaria, they weren't in Judea because they didn't fit either place. And as Jesus walked by, he took the time to heal 10 of them. There was the widow who lost a son that Jesus raised to life again as they walked by the funeral procession. I'm waiting for that day when I'm in a funeral procession and the funeral director pulls the hearse over and says, guys, party's done. Y'all can go home. They just sat up. Hasn't happened yet. But I keep hoping one day it will. But Jesus' ministry is filled with these incidents where he took the needs of people seriously. And as he could, he did something for them. Jesus' ministry was marked by teaching good words spoken to the crowds and by his good deeds that he did for people. There was a great mix of these things. And it wasn't just in his nature to do this, it was the way he taught his disciples to do ministry as well. On more than one occasion, he sent his disciples into the cities, into the towns and the surrounding countryside, and he told them to go heal, to go help, to go drive out demons, and to speak about the kingdom of God. Jesus understood that adage that says people will not care what you know until they know how much you care. And there's something about Jesus that draws the attention of the world, not just because of what he said, but by the way he did ministry, by the way he showed compassion on people. Jesus balanced good deeds with good teaching. And for many churches today, this is hard. This is hard. Matter of fact, I would dare say that if you can look at a church budget, you can tell how seriously they take this balance. There is a constant tension between taking care of the needs of people and funding church ministry. And every church has to find that balance in and of itself. What do we do to meet the needs of people, many of whom have nothing to do with our church? And the second thing is, well, what do we do to take care of the people in the church and to keep programs running and electric bills paid? Haven't the electric bills been outrageous? Just simple comment as somebody new to the area. Oh my. This is a constant tension every church has to walk through. It's not a problem we can fix. It's a tension we need to live in because Jesus calls us to minister in our community, to the needs of our community, and in the church to the people that are becoming disciples. Now, Jesus, I think, represented this challenge a little bit to what it meant to look like into our world. Actually, in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, it's the longest sermon that we have in the Gospels that Jesus preached. It was one of the earlier sermons that he preached. And most of us recognize it because the beginning of it starts with those beautiful Beatitudes. You know, those 8 sayings real quick. Blessed are those, blessed are those, blessed are those, or happy are those. But very rarely, we recognize those parts, but the very next thing that Jesus says as he walks through that, after he gets through the Beatitudes, is he talks about who he expected his disciples to be and how we were to live in relationship to the world. So in Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, Jesus says this, right after the Beatitudes, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And it is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men that may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." And Jesus here, he kind of gives us 2 inklings of how he wants us to interact with our world. First of all, he says, we are the salt of the earth. We are the salt of the earth. And salt is so much more than just a flavor that we throw on food or that doctors tell us we shouldn't throw on food for our enjoyment. It's more than what we wish they spread more on the roads for to clear them off quicker. In the first century, salt was actually a medicine. They used it as an antiseptic to clean wounds. And it does have some antiseptic qualities, not as good as modern medicine, but in that day, it was about the best they had. Salt was used as a preservative. It was added to meat and dried the meat so they could keep the meat longer. We still do it now. We just call it jerky, and we eat it honestly as like an extra. But in those days, it was the mainstay of how they had protein. Salt was necessary for life. As a matter of fact, it was so necessary that Roman soldiers in those days were paid at times in salt. You know that expression, is the guy worth his salt? No, okay, maybe you don't know that expression, but that expression is over 2,000 years old. That literally, like, is the man worth what we're paying him? Is he worth his salt? And so the idea of salt is simply this, is that it's subtle, and it pervades, and it preserves, and it heals, and it enhances. We are the salt of the earth. But then he goes on to say that we are also the light of the world. Now, light exposes things. It makes them clear. Without light, we would stumble around in darkness. Without light, every trip through the house in the middle of the night would be an adventure in stubbing your toe on something. Without light, every car would end up in a ditch somewhere along the way. Light not only exposes things, but it reveals things to us so that we can navigate life safely. So light is immediately noticeable. It reveals and warns and protects and assures us of what's around us. So the contrast here is salt is the way that we do things that will enhance or do good things. Along the way that how I would read into this, how we come alongside people and help. Salt enhances our lives and others' lives. But light is the way we speak into our world about truth. It's the way that we reveal God and his ways to those around us. And did you notice that Jesus said, not some of you are salt and some of you are light? He said we all are salt and light in our world. In other words, all of us are here to do good things to those around us. All of us have a charge to speak the words of truth into other people's lives. And when we get this balance right, verse 16 says that they will see our good deeds and they'll know to praise our Father in heaven. In other words, we've said enough and done enough that they even know who to thank when it's all said and done. Now, if Christ Church here is going to be the church that Jesus intended her to be, we've got to maintain this balance between proclaiming the truth and teaching the truth and having classes and also being good for people around us and doing good things to people around us. It's a balance between speaking and serving. We need to boldly tell the truth about who God is and his ways. We need to boldly serve some of the needs of our community. I think the church is most effective when it looks within itself for a moment and figures out what resources, what do we have to offer, and then looks within the community and says, what do they need? And then we do what we could or what we can. That's not a small exercise, by the way. That's not something that, one day somebody will have a bright idea, even though we do hopefully get a few bright ideas along the way. That's done with a lot of introspection as a church and a lot of looking out there at our world to see what's necessary and needed. But let me tell you, there are a lot of needs out there that need to be met. And I don't know what it's going to look like here completely, but let me tell you a few things that I've seen in my life that I think have been amazing. I've seen people visit in nursing homes and in jails and in hospitals that have really brought light and heart and help to those who were there. I've seen churches take over programs of mentoring kids in schools, and it's been a beautiful thing to see kids grow and learn. I know churches that teach practical life skills in their communities, things like budgeting and finances and things like writing resumes and getting out into this world and being able to function in this world. I've seen churches do community cleanups and offering times of prayer at public festivals. Folks, that is an amazing thing. If you've never had a chance to do that before, I was a part of one time. And the church went to, you've seen these craft shows and different things. The church just bought a booth there, and they just offered, it just said free prayer on the top of it. And they literally just, anybody that went by that ventured in, they would just ask, can we pray for you in some way? And for 3 straight days of that festival, they prayed with people, hundreds of people throughout the course of the festival. It was an amazing thing. Anyway, there's other things. We can distribute food. We can coach people. We can handyman projects for those in need or seniors in the community. There's gas cards and grocery cards that can be given away. There's care packages for service members. There's putting up booths for kids' activities and fairs and festivals and things that are happening in the town. There's handing out water and ride sharing and offering ESL classes. Do y'all do that around here? English as a second language classes? Well, I tell you where I came from, that was a huge thing. We had such a huge community of people that, matter of fact, the one elementary school we worked the most with was in a community that was populated by 5 or 6 lower income housing districts where a lot of people that were new to the country moved into, and their parents spoke and read no English. And so we actually went into the schools and worked with those kids, helping teach them English because they weren't learning it at home and they weren't getting enough of it in school. And then we had an older lady in our church, God bless her. She was a spitfire. But she actually started offering ESL classes for the parents through the local library, and we began to advertise it. And it was an amazing ministry to get to know people in your community that honestly you would never have a chance to interact with or talk with any other way. but it was beautiful. You can, local shelters, food banks, and ministries always need volunteers. You can foster kids in your home. Folks, that is huge. I don't know if you understand the size of the need of that in our communities today. And if you don't foster kids, you can encourage those who do foster kids, because those who take kids into their homes need extra help. Because things like vacations get really hard to do. And they need a little encouragement along the way and sometimes help. And because when you're fostering kids, you just can't leave the kids with the older sibling. The law doesn't allow it. You have to have actually people that can come in and watch them that are certified in some way, that are allowed to. Man, wouldn't it be cool if the church decided to certify half of its membership and just help in some areas like that? You can take in an exchange student. You can shovel or blow snow. You can take a week off of work and volunteer for a summer camp somewhere to work with kids. Folks, this is the tip of the iceberg. There's so many things that can happen. And I applaud Christ Church here, because you all have taken the needs of the community into mind as you've decided what to do as a church. And you have a food pantry that you serve 20 to 30 families a month who are in need here in this area, in this county. You've got, what do they call it, the Dollar Club? Is that what it's called? Okay, I'm really new here, so I'm just reading things on the wall sometimes. And a Dollar Club where you're taking in money to help with special needs of people that come to you monetarily and say, hey, listen, I can't pay my rent this month, or hey, I'm short on this, and there's a way to help fund that. And these are amazing things that you all have already recognized in your community. There's a way that we can help. And I'm here to say that when my eyes are on ministry, like Jesus' eyes are on ministry, there are more things that we're going to begin to see. And I think we need to start asking the question, not just corporately as a church, but individually as people, are we doing what we could? Are we doing what we could? You see, the ways that we as individuals meet the needs of others is a vital part of our discipleship. In other words, we talked about discipleship last week, and I said it's more than learning stuff and taking notes, but it's also a way of life that we learn to live. This example that Jesus set for us, this example the disciples set for us, should be an example we're setting for one another, and teaching each other to do within the church is not just how to serve in the church, but how to serve in our community in ways that meets the needs of those around us. On a personal level, man, I think this is one of the hardest questions for us to wrestle through in our lives, is how do I serve the needs of my community? I have a good friend in the church where we just came from, and he's one of the most unique individuals you'll ever meet in your life. And you will meet him if you ever attend the church up there. He is out front all the time talking with people. And if you ask him, how you doing today, he'll always respond with this phrase, it's the best day of my life. And just a side note, I was there the day they diagnosed him with prostate cancer. And I called him and I said, hey, Jerry, how you doing? He said, it's the best day of my life. And I thought, dude, you were blowing smoke. And he was like, no, he said, I've had a life like hardly anybody else, and I have nothing to complain about. And if this is the hardest thing I walk through, then okay. But Jerry works in a shop. He's an hourly worker in a shop. And there's a lot of shops in Detroit, Michigan that supply the auto industry, and they make all sorts of different things. And this shop is a lot like most of them. There are a few Christians there. There's a lot of people that aren't. You know, as he puts it, he says, in respectable company, I can't repeat anything I hear on the floor of my shop, because it's that kind of a place. He says, as a matter of fact, after work in my shop, he said, I can't hang out with the people that are there because they go places and do things that good people shouldn't do. He says, that's my ministry place. That's where God put me. He says, so every day he walks through that shop, and he doesn't interact with everybody in the shop every day, but he walks through the shop, and he reminds every guy that works in that shop, it's mostly men, hey man, I love you. Can I pray for you? It's as simple as it gets. And I'll be honest, he gets mocked by a few of them until they need something. And when they start to go through trouble, the first person they find is Jerry. And they pull Jerry aside and say, Jerry, my wife just left me, or my kids are in trouble, or my mom's in the hospital, or Jerry, I just had my review, and I think they're going to let me go. And Jerry pauses on the line on the floor of the shop, and he prays with every person he can. And so I say that to say sometimes the things that we do in our community aren't huge programs that we need to build a whole infrastructure and get an LLC and some sort of licensing to be able to do. Sometimes they're as simple as, are we talking with the people around us and working through the things that they're walking through in their life? In your workplace, you have an opportunity for a ministry if you'll open your eyes to what God has around you. In your neighborhood, you have an opportunity for ministry. And I know neighborhoods look very different in this area. Some of you live out in the country and you're a half mile from your nearest neighbor. And some of you are in tightened little neighborhoods where across the back fence you can see 3 or 4 other houses. But let me tell you, in your neighborhood, you could be the one to initiate conversation. You could be the one that loans out all your stuff to everybody around you. Boy, that's a challenge. We had a across the street neighbor at the place that I just left. He literally spent a third of his day just, at times, I'd look over and he's at that neighbor's house, and he's at that neighbor's house, and he's at that neighbor's house. If they had any work to do, he'd just show up and help. Man, what if we were that guy in the neighborhood instead of that guy in the neighborhood? You know what I mean? We have an opportunity for ministry. Even just the places we go and the places we interact. When our girls were growing up and we had a chance, they were dancers, and we went to a lot of dance competitions. They were in the band. We went to a lot of football games. Had to explain football to our girls because they didn't get it. We sat in the stands with a lot of parents, and we talked about nothing and everything. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes one of the best conversations you can have with another parent or another grandparent is just to ask them how their kids or their grandkids are doing. Because little secret to life, for those of you who are trying to figure out life right now, not one parent in the world knows really what they're doing. We can't admit that out loud, but none of us know what we're doing. We're just kind of stumbling our way through it, and there's every day, every week, there's a new challenge that we've never faced before and a new answer we haven't figured out how to give yet. And it's amazing if you just give people a chance to talk, what they'll say, what they need. And whether you're there to provide answers for them or you're just there to listen and provide some really cheap therapy for a moment, let me tell you, we need it. In every venue we're in, it's needed. And so I'm convinced of this, that there is a ministry that we have in our community that maybe we haven't found or haven't figured out, but it's there. It's there if we have eyes to see it. Now I'm going to finish up with a couple of thoughts here and one more quick Jesus story, if there's such thing as a quick Jesus story. No church can meet all of the needs of its community. No one church can meet all of the needs of its community. As a matter of fact, sometimes this keeps churches from even trying. It becomes an excuse to say we can't really do it all, so we don't do anything. We don't have enough money to feed the kids that need lunches at school, so we don't start. We have nowhere to house homeless people, so why would we even investigate? But I heard a minister once say this: do for the one what you wish you could do for everyone. Do for the one what you wish you could do for everyone. In other words, do what you can, and for that what you can't do, just trust that God has another plan for that. And let him work it out. See, I watch as Jesus went through ministry. It seemed like he had a plan for what he was doing, but even though he had a plan and a mission and he was going from city to city to village, to place, he always took the time to stop when there was a need of some individual in front of him to meet it. Let me read this story. You'll recognize this story. It's in Mark chapter 2. You read it this week, right? Okay, yeah. Are you all getting the hint here? I'm not gonna give up on this, okay? A few days later, when Jesus entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered there that there was no room left, not even an outside door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came bringing a paralytic carried by 4 of them. And since they could not get to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, and after digging through it, lowered the mat the paralyzed man was lying on. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, some of the teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does he talk like that? That's blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts, and he said to them, "Why do you think like this? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat, and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has the authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and walk. Go home." And he got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We've never seen anything like this." Now, there's a lot in this passage that we don't have time to get to today, and especially the stuff about forgiving sins and all of that. We'll save that for another message and another time. But what I want you to notice is that Jesus was in the middle of doing something that God had sent him to do. He was preaching to a crowd, and it was a packed crowd. And when someone in need came to his attention, now you cut a hole in the roof above my head and lower something down right in front of me, that's going to get my attention. And Jesus didn't say, "Why are you doing this?" and step around the man and continue to preach to the crowd. Instead, he saw the need and he stepped into the moment. There was something about Jesus that couldn't allow him to ignore the needs of a person, even for doing one of the very purposes that God sent him to do. He loved people that much. And for me, that's the crux of it. There's something about Jesus and the way that he conducted life that he showed to the world around him that he actually loved them by the attention he showered upon them and the way that he met their needs. And I just wonder, maybe we all ought to wonder, how can we live like Jesus? How can we live like him? Let me pray. We'll be done. Well, we'll sing another song too, but we'll be done then. Father, it is so good to be here with your people and to know that you're an amazing God who does amazing things. And Father, you didn't ignore us and our needs. But Father, you stepped in and you helped and you served us at times when you very, very truthfully, your son had enough honor in him that we should have been serving him. And instead, he served us. Father, I pray that you give us eyes to see the needs of what's around us and a heart that's willing to step in and help. Father, may we learn to live like your son did as the way that we do things. Father, may we see ministry, not just as a church, but in our own lives, the same way that Jesus saw ministry in his life. Father, every person we meet is some opportunity in some way. Lord, help us to take advantage of some of those opportunities and to do what we can. So, Father, today I'm praying for those opportunities, and I'm praying for the eyes of us to open to see those opportunities. And in the midst of it, we're going to praise you that you are a great God that is orchestrating all of this all the time. That, Father, that the meetings that we have, even the ones that seem casual, Father, sometimes aren't as casual as we think they might be. But, Father, divine appointments that you've set aside, that, Father, that we could in some way heal and give and serve and love and help and encourage and walk alongside. So, Father, open our eyes to what can happen. And, Father, may we do ministry like Jesus did. And, Father, together, we praise you for who you are and we love you. And all God's people said, amen. Amen.
Let's all rise together as we conclude our service.